Dennis Rodman did not sound like a man joking around. He sounded like a man who had finally reached his limit. The moment LeBron's name came into that live TV talk, the whole mood changed. Up to that point, it was normal basketball talk. Rodman was speaking calmly, talking about the game, talking about the old days, talking like someone who has already lived through every kind of pressure the league can create. Then the topic shifted toward LeBron, toward this idea that today's stars have gone beyond the men who built earlier eras, and suddenly Rodman looked like he had heard enough. That is why this moment hit so hard. It was not loud just for the sake of being loud. It felt personal. It felt like years of respect being chipped away finally came out in one sharp response. And when Rodman fired back, people did not just hear anger, they heard a warning. They heard a former champion speaking for a whole group of older players who feel like the story of basketball keeps getting rewritten around one modern superstar. That is why this moment spread so fast. It was not just Dennis Rodman against LeBron James. It was old-school pride against modern hype. It was the feeling that the players who gave everything to this game are now being treated like old footage instead of the reason the sport became what it is. Rodman did not just react to one comment or one joke. He reacted to a pattern, to a feeling, to years of hearing older legends pushed to the side every time the greatest of all time talk comes around. That is the real heart of this story. It is not really about one sentence. It's about what that sentence stood for. Dennis Rodman has never been the kind of former player who spends every week online begging people to respect him. He never needed that. His career speaks for itself. 5 championships, 7 straight rebounding titles, one of the toughest defenders the game has ever seen. A man who made life miserable for the best players in the world and did it with a smile on his face. He did not build his name with easy points or pretty numbers. He built it through pain, effort, timing, and pure will. So when someone like that speaks with that much force, people stop and listen because they know it is coming from somewhere real. And that is exactly why the LeBron angle matters so much here. LeBron is one of the greatest players ever, no question. His numbers, his years in the league, his titles, his impact, all of it puts him in the very top group in basketball history. But that level of greatness also creates a strange effect. Once a player becomes that big, the whole sport starts getting measured through him. Every old legend gets compared to him. Every past era gets judged by how it looks next to him. Every conversation turns into some version of, could that guy do this in LeBron's time? Or would that team survive? And if you were Dennis Rodman, a man who fought through one of the roughest eras the league has ever had, that is not something you laugh off forever. People forget what Rodman's career really looked like because they remember the hair, the headlines, the wild image, and all the noise around his life. But once the game started, none of that mattered. He was a machine. He rebounded like the ball owed him something. He defended like every play was personal. He could get under anyone's skin. He could break rhythm, ruin comfort, and change games without needing the offense to run through him. That kind of player does not always get the same love as the stars who score 30 a night. But coaches, teammates, and serious fans know exactly how valuable that type of player is. Dennis Rodman was not a side piece in basketball history. He was one of the main reasons some of the greatest teams ever were able to win the way they did. That is what makes the idea of him feeling brushed aside so believable. If the basketball world keeps talking like older legends were just stepping stones for the stars of today, then of course somebody like Rodman is going to take that badly. He did not survive all those wars to be talked about like a relic. He did not win titles with the Pistons and the Bulls just to be told, directly or indirectly, that his era was too simple, too rough, or too limited to compare with modern greatness. And once that feeling builds up for years, it only takes one live TV moment, one joke, one smirk, one clip, one comment, and suddenly it all comes out at once. What made this whole thing even bigger is that it happened in a setting where nobody expected a real explosion. That is why people replayed it so much. Rodman did not walk in acting angry. He was calm. He looked comfortable. He looked like a man ready to tell stories and enjoy the conversation. But that is exactly what made the shift so easy to notice.
Once the subject turned toward LeBron and the old era started getting framed in that familiar way, Rodman's face changed, his body language changed, the tone changed. You could feel that he was no longer just listening, he was measuring what was being said and deciding whether to let it slide or say what he really felt. When he finally chose the second option, the whole room felt smaller. That is why his response landed like a punch. It was not polished. It was not one of those safe answers athletes give when they want to avoid headlines. It came out raw. And raw moments are powerful because people can tell when they are real. They might not agree with every word, but they know it is honest. Rodman's anger did not sound fake. It sounded like the voice of a man who felt that the respect owed to his generation had been shrinking for years. In that one moment, he stopped being just Dennis Rodman, the wild personality, and became Dennis Rodman, the defender of an era, the defender of the men who played in blood and bruises basketball.
Of course, the other side of this story is that LeBron himself did not need to say much for all of this to happen. That is what makes the debate so complicated. A lot of people looked at the whole thing and said Rodman was reaching, that he was reacting to a media culture more than to LeBron himself. And that argument is fair in one way. LeBron cannot control every TV host, every fan account, every old clip, every online debate, or every hot take that uses his name to tear down older players. Sometimes the media does that on its own because it knows controversy brings clicks. Sometimes fans do it because they want their favorite player to sound even bigger. So in that sense, LeBron is not always the direct source of the disrespect older players feel. But at the same time, that does not make Rodman's feeling less real. Because whether the message came from LeBron's own words, from people around him, or from the way modern basketball media keeps framing history, the result is the same. Rodman and many others see a version of basketball history where older players keep getting pushed down to make room for bigger modern praise. They see a league culture where one player's greatness becomes so large that it starts swallowing the value of everyone before him. And if you're a legend from another era, that kind of talk can feel like being erased slowly, one debate at a time. That is why so many fans split into two hard groups after Rodman's outburst. One side said he finally said what needed to be said. They saw it as truth bursting through a fake modern script. They believed older players have been too polite for too long, while a game keeps talking like the past was just a weak warm-up for the present. To those fans, Rodman was not bitter, he was honest. He was standing up for players who were tougher than people now give them credit for. He was reminding the world that there is no LeBron without the men who came before him, just like there was no Jordan without the men who came before Jordan. That side of the fan base saw Rodman as a voice of pride. The other side saw something else. They said this was just another case of an older star getting angry because time moved on. They said LeBron has earned all the praise he gets, and if people compare him to earlier legends, that is part of being an all-time great. They argued that Rodman took general talk about eras and made it personal. They said greatness does not need to stop and apologize to every former player who feels left behind by the current spotlight. And to be honest, that side was not totally wrong either. Sports history is always changing. New stars always rise. Old stars always get compared. That is part of the cycle. No era gets to stay on top forever. But what made this moment last longer than a normal sports fight is that both sides had a point. That is why people kept talking about it. Rodman was not crazy for feeling the way he felt, and LeBron supporters were not crazy for saying that modern greatness naturally leads to big comparisons. The real problem goes deeper than either man. The real problem is the way the game gets talked about now. It's like there is only room for one name at the top, and in order to keep that one name there, everyone else has to be pushed lower. That is a lazy way to tell basketball history. It turns a rich story with many eras, many styles, many kinds of greatness into one long argument about who sits on one chair.
Dennis Rodman's whole career stands against that kind of simple thinking. He was never easy to explain. He was not built for clean box score praise. He was not built for neat debate shows. You had to really understand the game to understand him. You had to see how he changed pace, how he broke comfort, how he won position before the rebound even came off the rim, how he defended without fear, how he gave winning teams the ugly edge they needed. He was not there to be pretty. He was there to make sure the other team suffered. And when a player like that feels disrespected, it is not only about himself, it is also about the kind of play.
This was a guy who spent much of his career being misunderstood, and then spent retirement watching people act like the only greatness that matters is the kind that comes with giant scoring numbers and long highlight reels. Rodman knows what it means to be overlooked even while winning at the highest level. So when he hears talk that makes old rings sound smaller, old toughness sound less important, and old legends sound like outdated models, he hears more than just bad analysis. He hears disrespect toward every player who gave the game their body without needing constant love in return. And that is where the LeBron debate becomes so emotional. Because LeBron's career is so huge that people often feel they need to clear space around him. They do not just praise him, they build him upward by cutting others down. They say older defenders could not guard him. They say older athletes were less skilled. They say older titles were easier or less meaningful. They say modern stars are simply too advanced. And once those ideas repeat enough times, they stop sounding like opinion and start sounding like a new official history. That is what Rodman was really fighting against. He was not just fighting a player, he was fighting a way of telling the story of basketball that makes older greatness seem small, so newer greatness can look even bigger. That is why his outburst felt bigger than a normal sports headline. It touched a nerve that has been there for years. Many former players probably feel some version of what Rodman said, even if they would never say it that way. They look around and see a culture that loves the present so much it treats the past like old furniture, useful once, maybe, but not to be admired too much now. They see debates where men who fought in tougher rules and harsher conditions are treated like they were too basic to handle today's stars. They hear people speak about history with no weight in their voice, and they wonder if respect in this league only lasts until the next giant name comes along. The silence after Rodman's words only made everything bigger. Once the clip spread, everyone waited to see if LeBron would respond, if someone close to him would say something, if the media would calm it down, if another legend would step in. But silence can be powerful too. Some people saw it as maturity, some saw it as strategy, some saw it as proof that there was no need to feed the fire. But others saw it as something else. They saw silence as a sign that Rodman had struck somewhere uncomfortable. In sports, silence is often louder than noise because fans can pour whatever meaning they want into it. And that is exactly what happened here. For many people, the silence kept the clip alive because it gave them room to argue even more. Was Rodman right? Was LeBron above it? Was the media at fault? Was the whole thing blown out of proportion? Those questions kept the story breathing, and the more it breathed, the more people started talking about respect, legacy, and how basketball history gets told. In that sense, Rodman did more than create a viral moment. He forced a reset in the conversation. He reminded people that old legends are still watching how the game speaks about them. They are still hearing the comparisons. They are still noticing when their work gets brushed aside. And maybe that is why this moment matters, even if you think Rodman went too far. Sometimes it takes somebody speaking harshly to break through all the safe, polished nonsense. Sometimes real feeling has to interrupt the smooth TV version of sports talk. Because too often, these debates stop being human. They become numbers against numbers, ring counts against ring counts, era against era, like the people inside the story are just pieces on a board. Rodman's reaction reminded everyone that these are real men with pride, real men who bled for the game, real men who do not want to hear their whole life's work turned into a small footnote in someone else's legend.
The truth is, basketball greatness is not one straight line. It is not built by replacing one man with the next. It is built in layers. Old stars made room for new stars. Old battles built the stage for new battles. Old sacrifice made modern comfort.
You do not honor the present by mocking the past. You honor the present by understanding what it stands on. That is the point Rodman was trying to force into the room. Maybe he said it in the roughest way possible. Maybe he said it too sharply for some people's taste. But the center of it was simple. Respect should not vanish just because the spotlight moves. And when you look at Rodman's life and career, that message becomes even stronger. This is a man who never had the easy path. He did not come into the league as the chosen face of basketball. He did not get protected like a golden child. He earned everything in a rough way. He built his name through the hard jobs most players hate. He threw himself into the ugly side of winning and made it matter. That kind of player will always take disrespect harder because he knows how much pain is hidden behind the trophies. He knows what it cost. So when he feels that cost is being laughed at, even a little, of course it is going to hit him differently. At the same time, this whole story is also a reminder of how impossible the LeBron conversation has become. LeBron is so big that every debate around him turns into a battle over history itself. People cannot just say he is great. They have to say everybody else was less. And then older players react to that. Then fans react to the reaction. Then the media makes a bigger show out of all of it. That cycle keeps going because sports talk now feeds on conflict. It does not want careful history. It wants sharp lines, angry faces, and quotes people can post in all caps. Rodman gave the sports world exactly that, but he also gave it something deeper, whether people noticed or not. He gave it honesty. Not perfect honesty, not soft honesty, not calm honesty, but honesty from the gut. And in a media world full of careful brand answers, that kind of honesty hits hard. It makes people uncomfortable because it cannot be cleaned up easily. Rodman did not sound like he was trying to win a PR battle. He sounded like he was tired of keeping it inside. That is why even people who disagree with him still talk about the moment. They know there was real feeling there. They know it was not fake performance. They know it came from somewhere years deep. So where does all of this leave the story? It leaves it in a place where nobody fully wins. Rodman does not suddenly become more respected just because he went viral. LeBron does not suddenly lose his greatness because an older legend came at him. What changes is the way people hear the debate now. They hear more tension inside it. They hear the old generation speaking through moments like this. They hear the pain that comes when history feels like it is being retold without enough care. And maybe that is useful. Maybe basketball needed a moment like this. Maybe it needed someone rough enough and fearless enough to break the polite surface and remind everyone that legacy is not just a talking point. Dennis Rodman snapped because in his eyes, the respect line had been crossed too many times. He saw a game he helped build, speaking about him in his era like background material, and he refused to sit there and take it. Whether you think he was fully right or partly wrong, that much is clear. This was not random. This was not empty rage. This was a legend defending the weight of his own time in basketball history, and that is why the moment will stick. Not because it was mean, not because it was viral, but because it said out loud something the sport has been dancing around for years. In the end, this was bigger than Dennis Rodman and bigger than LeBron James. It was about whether the game still knows how to honor more than one kind of greatness. It was about whether sacrifice still means something once the cameras move on. It was about whether champions from older eras get to stay giants or whether they slowly get talked down into supporting roles for new stories. Rodman clearly has his answer, and he was not afraid to say it in the hardest way possible. That is why the moment